Parliament returns in less than 3 weeks, and already Bloc Quebecois leader Yves-François Blanchet is promising collaboration, not conflict, at least for a year. The Sovereigntist Party lost a third of its seats in Quebec, but with the Liberals returning to a minority parliament, the government will need some cross-party support. So far, Blanchet has given the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, at least one passing grade.
The expectations were not very high. Don't shame us in front of the president. Stand your ground. I believe he did that. He did not obtain any better deal about tariffs. We did not believe he would do that.
So in what areas is the Bloc willing to support the Liberals, and where does the party draw a line? Christine Normandin is the Bloc Quebecois House Leader, and she joins me now. It's good to see you again. Congratulations on your re-election, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's really great to be back. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start with what your leader said. Mr. Blanchet said the morning after the elections that Quebecers are looking for stability, and said, "I do not see any scenario other scenario than collaboration for at least a year." What does collaboration look like in this upcoming Parliament from the Bloc's perspective?
Well, I think we got a pretty clear mandate that Quebecers want us to work towards the best interests of Quebec. And at the very moment, the best interests of Quebec are to get our economy prioritized, defended in the next negotiations regarding CUSMA. So, and that goes with a bit of stability and collaboration will be the key issue in order to get our economy protected in the next negotiation. So we're not talking about having the government fall within with short notice. We'll have to work in order to make the negotiations work, and will be a contribution in that way.
So, but does that mean like what we saw last fall, where demanding increases to the OAS in return for support, demanding legislation saying hands off supply management in future trade talks? Do those issues come back on the table, or do you just broadly allow Mr. Carney to implement a reasonable agenda, nothing extreme here, as long as he's still dealing with Donald Trump? How should we view that?
Mm-hmm. But one of the things we'll be doing will be bringing back legislation on protecting supply management as soon as the House reopens. And we were kind of a strong force advocating for that during the campaign. If it had not been for the Bloc, nobody would have talked about supply management. So we'll bring that back. And something that we gained during the campaign was support from other parties. So it should go easily with maybe unanimous consent, having that legislation brought back. So that's how we're going to work, not necessarily with a standoff, but in a collaborative manner. But we always have different aces up our sleeve. We'll see if we need to use them, but there's a lot of things we can do collaboratively. And one of the examples was in 2019, what we did with aluminum, protecting it the way steel was protected. It was done without votes, without coercion. It was done through dialogue. So I think we can still do that in the best interest of Quebec.
Okay, but we're probably not going back to a parliament where we have like the ultimatums that we kind of saw throughout the fall, because the political dynamic strikes me as very different after the election. It's a new prime minister with a new mandate, and it's a minority, but seems a far more durable minority parliament. I think you might agree than what Mr. Trudeau was leading in September and October. It's going to be more of that proactive collaboration rather than parliamentary sort of standoffs.
I think so, at least at the very beginning. We don't know how long it will last, but at the very beginning, we'll all be headed towards having the best we can throughout the CUSMA negotiations. So I think that we'll be working in the same way, all of the parties. That's how I foresee it. We'll see how long it lasts, but it's still a minority government. That's something that we should not forget. It's a short minority, but it's still a minority. And I think that if need be, we'll be able to push a bit further, but we'll start in a collaborative fashion, and we'll see how it goes. I think there was openness to working with us. That's what we felt. We'll use that, and we'll see how long it goes.
Right. So just to talk about the election for a second, if I can. I mean, Mr. Carney, despite being an Albertan who's working on his French, he resonated with Quebec voters in a significant way because of the dynamic of the election campaign. They gained, they're over 40 seats in Parliament. Your party lost 10 seats in Quebec. What was the takeaway at your caucus meeting when you got together to sort of analyze the results?
Well, without going into details on what is said during caucus, I
Sure.
think that's something that we mentioned quite openly and that people realize it was a very atypical election. And what we felt on the ground was not that voters had something against the bloc. People were telling us we really appreciated what you did, the work that you've done. You've worked with rigor and were a good contribution. But we felt that this time what spoke the loudest was fear, and I think that for future elections, the bloc will be back in spades, as it was not something against us. It was just something maybe not always rational. Fear is not always rational, but when we discussed with people, when we took the time, and it takes time sometimes to break down fear, they realized that the bloc was their best asset. So maybe if we had had a longer campaign, the results would have been different. But we felt that it was not something against our party.
Right. I wonder if I can ask you about something else. I mean, the Bloc Quebecois is a sovereigntist party. You're working towards Quebec sovereignty, sort of at your core. But you and Mr. Blanchet are talking about collaborating with the national government to deal with the United States right now. There is something happening in Alberta. We don't know if it's going to get to a separation referendum or not, but it's moving on a possible path. And Mr. Blanchet was asked about what's happening with Daniel Smith and this movement yesterday. I just want to play that clip if I can and just get your reaction to it. Here's Mr. Blanchet.
The first idea is to define oneself as a nation. Therefore, it requires a culture of their own. And I am not certain that oil and gas qualify to define a culture.
What's Mr. Blanchet saying about Alberta there, Ms. Normandin? How do you view that, and how do you think Albertans are going to view that comment?
Well, it's really up to them, actually. We managed to get the House recognize Quebec as a nation. I think the first step for Albertans would be to themselves recognize them as a nation. If they do so, and well, they are totally entitled to self-determination. I don't think it's up to us as Quebecers to tell them what to do, but maybe it's a little some type of a tip to make sure that they see themselves as a nation on the path forward. But it's really up to them, and we definitely won't intervene in that decision. And you'll see no loving from the Bloc Quebecois towards Alberta neither.
Well, is that an insult? I mean, if I heard Mr. Blanchet say that and I was in Alberta, I mean, I might take that as an insult to my province.
I don't think that should be considered as an insult. Not being a nation per se is not an insult, but it's still something that will have to be defined by Alberta. When Canadians see Canada as being founded by two nations, was it Quebec and Alberta? Maybe the answer is no, and that's not necessarily an insult. But on the path to self-determination, recognizing oneself as a nation is one of the keys. So that's a question Alberta will have to ask itself. But I don't necessarily see it as not necessarily. I don't see it at all as an insult. But it's a fact that maybe should be achieved in order to push for independence at some point. But it's really up to Alberta to decide for itself.
Okay, I just have one last question, and to circle it back to the state of the minority parliament and the collaboration for a year. What we saw in the White House meeting, and since then, the new ambassador from the United States to Canada saying the 51st state stuff, that's behind us, we're moving on. What's your view on what happened in Washington this week? Are you more optimistic of a speedy resolution, or is it still wait and see?
I think it's still a wait and see. When we think about the first meeting with Prime Minister Carney and President Trump, the bar was really low. What they were looking to achieve was not to be shamed by the state. So the bar was really low. But we'll see how it goes in the future. I think it's hard to tell from the first meeting how it will go, but we'll definitely be watching.
Christine Normandin, the Bloc Quebecois House Leader, thank you so much for your time today. It's good to speak with you again.
It's a pleasure.
All right, we're going to look ahead to the return to Parliament because the Bloc Quebecois says it's willing to collaborate with the minority Liberal government at least until the problems posed by President Trump are dealt with. Who knows how that could last? Earlier, I asked Bloc Quebecois House Leader Christine Normandin what collaboration looks like.
We got a pretty clear mandate that Quebecers want us to work towards the best interests of Quebec. And at the very moment, the best interests of Quebec are to get our economy prioritized, defended in the next negotiations regarding COSMA. We'll start in a collaborative fashion and we'll see how it goes. I think there was openness to working with us. That's what we felt. We'll use that and we'll see how long it goes.
Okay, so James, it's still a minority government, coming back to a minority parliament, but with the transitional leadership situation with the Conservatives, the low watermark for the NDP, and now cooperating in the national interest by the sovereigntist Bloc Quebecois, it seems like Mark Carney's going to have a bit of runway. How do you expect this to function when they come back on the 27th with the King?
Well, I think of all the parties in Parliament, well, maybe except for the NDP, but of all the parties in Parliament, the NDP or the Bloc Quebecois are probably the most predictable, right? Their North Star is the October 2026 provincial election campaign, and they want to see the Parti Québécois do very well versus Premier Legault, and they see that as a real opportunity. And they will use this intervening time, second, third quarter of 25 through until second and third quarter of 2026 to lay the groundwork for an argument that Mark Carney, even though you gave him more seats, still hasn't delivered for Quebec. So while Prime Minister Carney, he has these pressures from Alberta that we just talked about and pressures from elsewhere, he will have pressures that'll be mounting in the province of Quebec to deliver something significant, which will counterlever the obligation to then deliver something for Alberta and the rest of the country. But this is how democracy works, right? Pressure meets pressure, and then hopefully in the end, the fallout is good public policy that brings the country together. So see, I'd also say that every parliament starts off with everybody saying, we're going to work together and we're going to be thoughtful and we're going to be reasonable, and then it descends into just a hellscape. But it all starts off great, and the first cracks will show not on shows like yours, and it won't show up in question period, frankly, and it won't even show up in confidence votes in House. It'll show up in committees because while confidence votes in the Parliament itself and the threats of whether or not we have a campaign, that'll be predetermined, and we'll have some peace and stability for some while. But if the government tries to put forward meaningful legislation, the minority dynamic on the committee side, that's where you'll see foot dragging and some opposition tactics and all that. That's where things could get more challenging.
But Amanda, it seems certainly with the Conservatives, Mr. Carney has bought himself a bit of grace by saying, yep, we'll give you a quick by-election, no games, in terms of Mr. Poilievre coming back into Parliament. And while the NDP got a lot of things they need to figure out, and the Bloc, they say they're going to bring back their private members bill to get a declaration of protection for supply management, but I don't think you're going to see the sort of the ultimatums and standouts like we saw in Parliament in the fall.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting because when you think about how Parliament ended and the toxicity and how that ended up translating into the election, like we saw Poilievre have to take, a real 180 on the way that he was addressing Canadians because there was so much pushback on his style and his kind of attack dog style. And while he won't be in the House immediately, we expect that he will be ultimately. So does he continue, a more collaborative approach to how this Parliament will operate, or does he resume his obstructionist views of what to do? Does he resume sort of his attack dog style politics, which we know was unpopular with Canadians and especially with women that he needs to invite back into the party fold? I think that stuff matters. And what we're seeing early on, I don't disagree with James. I think that everybody starts off with better intentions. The country needs to come together. We have a bigger enemy that we have to, that we have to be united for. And I think that is the intention. But I do get the signal from Carney that this is not Prime Minister Carney. This is not about game playing. He's not interested. He still feels like the adult in the room. So is he able to bring some of that decorum to Parliament? Maybe.
Yeah, a hellscape, as James described it. That has been many a day, covering it. And hopefully we're a ways away from that, James. But, Shanchi, in terms of Pierre Poilievre won't be there until the fall, presuming he wins. If he loses in Battle River Crowfoot, the Conservatives have a bunch of problems we haven't even diagnosed yet.
Than we haven't discussed.
I don't think that's going to happen. But it seems in terms of the bloc and what James laid out in terms of looking ahead to the election next year, there is an opportunity here for the Prime Minister to work with the Premier of Quebec on quite a few things, to put some proof points there, like with the competing demand to do things with the prairie provinces as well.
There are actually endless opportunities for the Prime Minister should he choose to avail himself of them. I mean, first of all, in its crassest, worstest way, there is a world in pure retail politics where it's still not beyond the realm of possibility that he goes out and finds 3 willing MPs to join his caucus, maybe 4 for good measure, and his minority problems are gone. Also, this was not the election the Bloc Quebecois wanted. This is not the election result that the NDP wanted. It is not the election result that the Conservatives wanted. So if anybody is playing at this stage from a position of strength and to be able to emote and communicate, and we know he's an emoter, to say, look, Canadians want that stability and they want that national interest that Amanda was talking about, there is a world where he then turns to the other parties and says, look, I dare you to try and bring me down. I dare you to try and call this election. I dare you to not support me on regulations and on legislation that would otherwise put my party and my own government in peril. So it reminds me a lot about the early Harper terms, where yes, they were minority situations, but nobody really had the gumption to try and bring down that Harper government because they were divided and trying to figure out their own selves. And Harper very cannily on legislation to legislation pieces, on issue to issue pieces, was prepared to say, yeah, sure, bring me down, vote against me, even though it means you might be voting against something that you'd actually be aligned with or that we've negotiated around.
Andrew, how do you see it going? Like I think I've met Mark Carney once. I've never interviewed him or had a big conversation with him, so I don't know him. But from what I can tell, is I don't think he lacks from confidence. When he was asked, would you seek a deal with the NDP, he said no, and they said, why not? And he said, why? And it's like he's just intent to go in with his 168, 169 seats and lay out his agenda. I mean, what do you expect to see?
Yeah, it's interesting with Carney. I mean, the issue for the opposition parties right now is that they all would benefit by just going away for a little bit. Stepping back, not looking as much at the trees, start thinking again about the forest and what happened and what does that landscape start to look like. I think the risk for the Liberals is twofold in this Parliament. One is if they can't actually achieve their agenda. And I appreciate the points that have been made about, Harper actually was able to drive an agenda forward through Parliament. I mean, he was able to make deals. He was able to figure it out. Now, some of that may have been bravado.
He was able to work with Leighton in a way too, right? That would be surprising, I think, to people.
And the provinces. I mean, he was very successful in terms of being able, through successive minorities, to actually get a legislative agenda approved. Carney can learn something from that. And I think that the public right now, the point that maybe 3 or 4 people crossed the floor, that would be a hugely cynical move. And I think a lot of people would look at that, and that's the second risk he's got, is if he can't get something done, is does he end up looking like he's the partisan one? If the Conservatives are able to step back, figure out how to retool, get the mask reaffixed, whatever it is they need to do for another makeover, whatever the changes are that they need to do to retool, if the NDP can figure out how to actually start to identify where the mainstream of politics is, let alone maybe swim in it, they've got, both of those parties have big work ahead of them. Carney's got a moment in time where he can deliver, but he runs a real risk of overplaying his hand or playing it in a partisan way that I think doesn't speak to the voter coalition that he was able to put together.
Right. Yeah, James, I'd say Mr. Harper's ability to work with Mr. Leighton may be surprising, not because of the way it was back then, but because of the Conservative NDP dynamic of the day, right? It's certainly not collaborative whatsoever. But I wonder, how do you think, having been part of those minority Conservative days, I mean, how do you think we see Mr. Carney play this in terms of he's got to get a budget in, how big and aggressive he goes on these things, and what the room is for cooperation beyond the bloc?
Well, I guess I'll reluctantly add my voice to those who were saying that Stephen Harper showed the way.
That's a brave admission for you to make, James. Such courage. We appreciate it.
James.
Yeah.
No, but you're right. Like the truth is the dynamics of Parliament dictate everything, right? And actually, the 08 to 11 Parliament was even more stark, right? Because you had the Liberals after the defeat of Stéphane Dion in 08, and then the failed coalition crisis, gambit that they played and all that the Liberals just frankly didn't show up and they abstained on everything. So we de facto had a majority government almost for about a year and a half there prior to the 2011 actually winning a majority in Parliament. So, the polls will dictate these things, right? Like, it's conceivable that the Democrats, while they have 9 seats, they could go further down in the polls, and those 9 members of Parliament will really want to hold on to their seats. And I don't mean that in a cynical or a cheap way, but hold on to their seats because in the time that they have there, they actually might want to contribute something meaningful to public policy and support the government and do something, right? It's conceivable that the Conservatives could recognize that Prime Minister Carney actually is moving forward on Build Baby Build, and in which case they want to be part of that and they want to steer him in a direction that'll be better understood and better be bought into by parts of the country that have been felt left out. I am an optimist. I'm hopeful that people will see that the rest of calendar 25, most of calendar 26, people can park their politics and actually get on with nation building and unite this country in a substantive policy way, not just some cheap rhetorical way, to bolster the strength of this country in the face of the threat from President Trump. I'm an optimist, and I'm hopeful that people will take this moment and put country first.
Yeah, look, I hate to correct you, James, and I don't want the NDP to think I'm punching down on them. They got 7 seats, not 9 seats in Parliament, and I'm not trying to be cruel. I just wanted to be accurate there. But yeah, no, I gotcha. But, Amanda, to James' point, though, like 25 and 26, setting aside sort of the hyper-partisanship we've seen, there is an imperative, it seems, for Canadian politicians to hold it together, at least until you get to the U.S. midterms, right? Where you hope, the inflection points in the American political calendar can affect the change in needs south of the border.
And I think that's a bit of the bright light. Like, if you imagine going into a new session without this, big ball that everyone's looking at, like, this is the thing that we can get united behind: how we negotiate our trade relationship, or how we diversify our trade relationships, or how we take down interprovincial trade barriers, or how we get our resources to market. Like, those are areas where we can find unity amongst these parties, while dealing with some of the more domestic issues that were also part of this election. But I think if those are the first things that Carney has to contend with, he's probably in a better stance than he would have been otherwise, because those are things that we know the country is behind, the Canadians are behind. They want us to move forward. They want to move forward quickly. And for any of the opposition parties to be seen as obstructionist on those issues, I think would be a big problem for them on the go forward. So in the first year anyways, he probably has a bit of a runway that he wouldn't maybe otherwise have had.
Right. I want to just get quick, it's a very narrow question because we're out of time, but the cabinet is coming next week. Big change, Amanda, or little change? How much of a shuffle do you think this is going to be?
I mean, I think there's going to be change. I think there needs to be change, because I think that part of this was about that fresh face or fresh look. But there are senior veteran members that are also critical to what's happening in these trade negotiations. So people like Melanie Joly, Champagne, LeBlanc, these are people that we would expect to continue to see. But in terms of the unity piece and how we're going to bring other parts of the country in, I also expect that we're going to see more from Western Canada on this cabinet. I think everybody does.
Well, it helps to have Liberals from Western Canada to be able to do that.
Yes, it does.
James, big change, little change. Just quickly, what do you think we're going to see?
Probably significant change. I think it'd be wise to have Minister Freeland not near economic or trade portfolios. It'd be wise not to have Ministers Guilbeault or Wilkinson near any energy or environmental portfolios. Change it up. Probably 1/3 new people, 2/3 holdovers. Of the 2/3 who are being held over, probably 50-50 new gigs, old gigs. Just a random guess.
I gotcha. Andrew, and then Shach.
I think that's a pretty smart take.
Yeah.
My sense is he's got some new talent he's got to bring in. There's some, really talented new folks who have been elected to this caucus that he's going to want to profile to give a sense that it's his government, not a hangover from the last one.
Shachi, last word.
Yeah, I would say that picking up on what James said, at this stage, it's almost more important who's not in certain portfolios as opposed to who is. So rookies can provide a breath of fresh air, but there are definitely within sectors and industries people that they do not wish to see again, and that may be the low-hanging fruit for the Prime Minister. Not a ton of bench strength, though, in terms of seasoned, experienced people to make a wholesale change. So it'll be a balance or a mix, I would presume.
Okay, well, we'll find out sometime in the week of the 12th, as we were promised. Amanda Alvaro, James Moore, Andrew Thompson, and Shachi Curl, thank you all so much.